As the trade confrontation between China and the United States intensifies, an unexpected player has stepped into the spotlight: Canada. Once considered a stable and loyal ally of Washington, Ottawa now finds itself entangled in a new geopolitical storm, forced to navigate between two global superpowers. In recent months, the Trump administration has sharpened its tone toward Beijing, imposing new tariffs, tightening investment restrictions, and declaring an all-out effort to reclaim control over global supply chains, all moves that China sees as open hostility. Predictably, Beijing has retaliated, and with every passing week, the tension grows more severe. Amid this turbulence, Canada, America's closest economic and security partner, can no longer stay on the sidelines. According to sources within both Canadian and U.S. political circles, Prime Minister Mark Carney recently paid a quiet but significant visit to Washington, where he met top figures in the White House and Congress. Reports suggest that Carney's tone was unusually firm, a clear, reasoned warning that both startled and angered Donald Trump, while also forcing parts of the U.S. establishment to acknowledge that his arguments were difficult to dismiss. Carney's message, insiders say, was simple but uncompromising. Canada's dependence on the United States, in trade, energy, and defense, has long been a foundation of stability. But if Washington continues down a path of economic coercion and threats, Ottawa will be compelled to seek new guarantees elsewhere, and the only viable alternative could be China. Behind closed doors, Canadian officials are reportedly exploring scenarios for a potential strategic pivot eastward. One government source claimed Carney directly characterized Trump's policies as a dangerous challenge that forces U.S. allies to reassess their commitments. If American aggression persists, Canada could begin formal talks on a security and trade partnership with Beijing, something previously considered unimaginable. For China, such a shift would be a diplomatic triumph, pulling America's northern ally into its orbit and extending Chinese influence to the edge of the North American continent. Media outlets in Hong Kong and Beijing report that Chinese envoys are already testing the waters, using economic incentives and back-channel diplomacy to gauge how far Canada might go. Analysts from the Globe and Mail and the Washington Post warn that any overt negotiations between Ottawa and Beijing could deal a serious blow to U.S. dominance in North America, placing Washington in an unprecedented strategic bind. A Canada-China partnership, even limited, would be seen in Washington as a symbolic victory for Beijing and a crisis of loyalty for America's closest neighbor. Still, Carney has emphasized that Canada is not acting impulsively. A full pivot toward China, he reportedly told U.S. counterparts, would be a last resort, a step only taken if Washington continues to escalate. Even so, the White House has begun internal discussions about softening its tone toward Ottawa to avoid losing an indispensable ally. For U.S. strategists, the prospect of Canada drifting out of the NATO and North American defense network represents not just a strategic setback, but a humiliation for Trump's foreign policy. The turning point came shortly after Carney's return to Ottawa. Canadian outlets revealed that the National Security Council held an emergency closed-door session to consider possible responses if the U.S.-China trade war spirals further out of control. According to CBC and Reuters, senior officials from defense, foreign affairs, and intelligence agencies were present. One insider described it as the first time in decades that Canada openly debated the idea of alternative alliances to secure its national autonomy. Among the proposals, closer cooperation with China in the Arctic Council and joint energy projects, particularly Chinese investment in Canada's northern regions. Experts note that if Beijing were to gain access to Canada's Arctic ports and resources, it could reshape the entire geopolitical balance of the Arctic, forcing the United States to face a strategic competitor directly on its northern border. Meanwhile, Chinese diplomacy is already moving. At a forum in Beijing, officials declared that China is ready to offer Canada a new framework for economic and security cooperation, built on equality and non-interference. Reports from the Global Times indicate that a delegation of Canadian business leaders has arrived in Shanghai for discreet talks with China's Ministry of Commerce. Topics reportedly include green energy, telecommunications, and transport infrastructure. Bloomberg analysts confirm that discussions are being held under strict confidentiality, with participants avoiding public comment. In Washington, alarm bells are ringing. According to Politico, the Trump administration is considering restricting energy and aviation technology agreements with Canada as a warning. Some Republican lawmakers have even proposed blocking Canadian access to U.S. defense contracts, a move experts say would backfire, pushing Ottawa even closer to Beijing. Diplomatic sources at the United Nations reveal that China is quietly assembling a Pacific Partnership bloc that could include Indonesia, Malaysia, Mexico, and possibly Canada, designed as a counterweight to the U.S.-led AUKUS alliance. If realized, this would mark a new era of geopolitical realignment across the Pacific. For Canada, Mark Carney's Washington visit may well be remembered as a historic inflection point. The moment Ottawa realized that its national interests no longer fully align with Washington's agenda. For China, it is the opportunity President Xi Jinping has long sought, a foothold in the Western Hemisphere and a symbolic victory over American influence. And for Trump, it represents a new and dangerous test of his America First doctrine. Publicly, both sides still speak of friendship and partnership. But behind closed doors, the message is unmistakable. A new era of mistrust has begun between Ottawa and Washington, and the great geopolitical game has just entered Canada's front yard.